Hi Warren, thanks for the footies, thanks for getting in touch, and hopefully after all this is over, we get to back to some sort of normality. We can meet up at the range and do a lesson in the real world. Between now and then, I just want to work over a few of the points that you made in your message. And I've been playing around with this lesson in my mind a little bit, and I'd like to do this slightly differently to what I would normally do, in the sense that I would like to do a sort of brief critique now, give you some sort of ideas to work on, and then I'd like you to send me some footage and I'll do a sort of part two of this lesson, which will only be a matter of 4 or 5 minutes long, but just so I can compare your original footage to where you will be pretty quickly, I feel, once you understand what you need to do, just so that you can have a little bit more clarity on exactly what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you start to see the benefits of it. So I'll go through the key areas with you now, some little things that I've spotted in your swing that I'd like to just tweak. And obviously the big issue is adding some tilt to the turn, explain where that comes from, and also touch a little bit on where you can start to generate a little bit more speed as well, which I'll come to towards the end. So initially what we're looking for is, and you mentioned in your text, you're looking for this sort of trying to create this downward trajectory of the lead shoulder during the downswing, during the backswing, which when you do it correctly means that the upper center, the orange dot, is stable, and the head would stay inside the box when you view it from face on, and also inside the box when you view it from down the line. So ideally, you can see I put the red line on down the line on your spine, and we've got the purple line which is at right angles to your spine. Ideally, you turn your shoulders in a circle at 90 degrees to your original inclination to the ground. So that's what we're trying to achieve. In order to do that, certain things have to happen. You've looked into the system a little bit already, judging by your text. So you understand that in order to keep the head stationary, or to keep the axis of the shoulder turn stable during the backswing, you need to extend, turn, and side bend. And I think this original session is just about clarifying exactly where your focus needs to be and how much you can afford to exaggerate these movements to get the swing looking the way you want it to. A few little tweaks at P1 first at your setup. One thing that I noticed was quite unusual, put the green arrow across the trail foot and the trail knee, so when the feet are turned out, the knees are turned out, and that frees up the pelvis to turn. One little move that you make, I don't know if you're aware of this, but just before you pull the trigger, you see you kick that right heel out and that right knee comes in. So that's actually making, working your pelvis properly a little bit more difficult than it needs to be. So one way you can try and sort of remedy that is to practice with a golf club on the ground along the outside of your trail foot. And then when you make that little move, you're going to push it into the golf club. You're going to get a little bit of feedback. It's not just the movement of your foot, it's the effect it then has on the knee, and the effect it then has on your ability to rotate that pelvis properly throughout the backswing. So that's just one little tweak you need to be aware of at setup. The other thing I'd like you to do at setup is push the pelvis forward a couple of inches. So I'd like to see your pelvis push towards your target just 2 inches or so that instead of having an upper center, which is out in front of the lower center, we have a situation where either they are on top of one another, or you can afford a few degrees of side bend away from the target. So for a player of your handicap, it's much more beneficial to have a little bit of side bend at P1. The right shoulder's lower than the left, the right hand's lower than the left, which is the main reason for that, which in turn means that there should be a little bit of side bend in the spine. Having the pelvis push forward a little bit at setup makes it easier for it to rotate during the backswing, And also, depending on the amount at which you push the pelvis forward, it can really help you hit out at the golf ball on the way through. But my main concern at the moment is just creating a little bit more of a stable platform to start with. So keeping the trail foot turned out, keeping the trail knee turned out rather than that little chink that you have there where it kicks in, and pushing the pelvis forward so that we're not starting from that sort of kinked back position as we are at present. So now onto the swing itself. During the backswing, you can see that the lead shoulder, this is something you're very aware of, does work across in a very level manner. And you can see there that, I mean, that's historically when players have overemphasized the turning aspect of the golf swing. So with a better player, the extension tends to kick in anyway because it's a mechanism for producing power. It doesn't necessarily kick in early enough, which is why you drift off the ball. So you bent forward at setup, as you can see down the line. You maintain that forward bend during the early part of the backswing whilst rotating hard. So the rate at which you are turning is excessive. The rate at which you are extending is actually fine, even though the head's coming out the box. The problem is we haven't got enough side bend to make up for the extension that's going in there. Now, if we look at it from down the line, we've already started to turn. We've already started to extend. So you're seeing the turn from the face-on footage. You're seeing the extension, the fact that the head started to lift out of that box. But what we haven't done yet is creating any side bend, and the side bend comes generally or predominantly from the knees changing flex. So the knees play a massive part in this for you. You're focusing on what the lead shoulder's doing, but the lead shoulder is heavily dependent on the knees changing flex in the correct manner. And you can see from down the line that the knees have done very, very little at that point in regards to changing flex. In my opinion, when I look at your overall action in the legs, the lead knee doesn't work inwards and towards the ball enough. It sort of does very little in the early part, almost kicks out towards the target, which is not helping you rotate the pelvis properly. It then starts to work in behind the ball more than it flexes towards. So it works across more than it works towards the golf ball, and it should actually be working in both ways. It should be working, the turning of the hips will bring the knee in, and the flexing of the lead knee needs to offset that. So as it works in, it needs to flex forward to put some tilt into the turn. The trail leg also needs to extend much more, much sooner, to give you more freedom of movement in the pelvis. So the more the knees work in an appropriate manner, the easier it is going to be for you to get the lead shoulder to work down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get some footage up for you of me demonstrating the moves that I want you to focus on. I actually want you to do this drill that I'm doing a couple of times before every shot. When it comes to the shot itself, I don't need you to think about things too much. The more you do this drill, especially if you do it the way I'm demonstrating it for you on this video, the more you do this drill, the more conditioned you become to changing flex in the knees. Once you start to change flex in the knees in a more appropriate manner, you're going to see the linkage between that and what the lead shoulder does during the backswing. So your ability to maintain your inclination to the ground and your ability to keep your head in the box from face on and produce the type of tilts in your swing that you want relies heavily on the way that your knees work. As your knees change flex, your pelvic tilts change, which means the tilts in your shoulders change, your ability to maintain your inclination improves dramatically. So I'm just going to get that footage up now for you and let you look and consider the differences. I'm going to leave your footage from down the line up when we do this. Okay, so back to your view from down the line. You've established some angles in the knees and the pelvis, and you're trying to keep your head in the box. We can see that you maintain the angles in the knees for too long. The pelvis sort of tucks under and levels out a little bit too much, and the head is raising out the box. We also saw from face on that the head moved away from the target. So that's a sign that the player is turning and extending without side bending sufficiently. Okay, so what I'm going to demonstrate now on the left is an exaggeration of each component. Actually, that's slightly incorrect. I'm exaggerating two components. I'm going to exaggerate severely the extension and the side bend. And when I was doing this, there was actually no attempt to rotate whatsoever. The area of the swing that most people focus on is the rotational aspect. And when you watch this, you start to realize pretty quickly that the rotation, you almost get free of charge. Because of the way we're built, as we start to increase the side bend, the rotation starts to kick in anyway. So it's the easiest thing to see. It's the thing that people get told about the most. It's actually probably the only one of the three components that if you do things correctly, you get free of charge, so to speak, or generally speaking, you get a lot of it free of charge, which you're about to see. So taking a setup, creating some angles in the knees, tilting the pelvis, trying to maintain my inclination to the ground is my overall goal, obviously, but I'm exaggerating. There's the extension. So you can see that the knees straighten, the pelvis comes out of its forward bend. Now, the head clearly comes out of the box. Now, as I extend, that's propelling the butt of the club upwards, propelling the left arm throughout the swing. Now, obviously, to put my head back in that box, I've got to create some side bend. I've got to offset the extension with some side bend. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start side bending my spine. You can see that side bending, side bending, side bending. Now, I've only got about 15 to 20 degrees of side bend available to me in the spine, and that goes for most people. So consequently, I've got to try and get, quite a few degrees more from somewhere. So what I get it from is the change in flex in the knees. You see the gap opening up between the knees. So I've extended as the knees change flex. The head goes back in the box, and my inclination started to become more as it should be once again. I accept that I'm not going to be exactly in that box. I'm making too much of an exaggerated move here, but you get the idea. So extend, side bend. If you pay attention to the buckle on my belt at this point, it's pointing sort of 90 degrees to where the camera's facing. As I start to side bend more and more and more and more and more, you notice how that rotation kicks in. I'm not trying to rotate at this point, but in order for me to continuously side bend, I have to start to change flex in the knees. And as soon as I start to change flex in the knees, I start to get some rotation in the pelvis and the shoulders, or the torso, so to speak. So just going to exaggerate that one more time. So there's the extension, and then the side bend in the spine, you can see is quite a small amount. But as the knees start to change flex, so the right leg straightened anyway during the backswing, but the lead leg flexes forward more, the head now comes back into the box. And you can see there's a marked difference there between the gap in our knees, which is a really good thing for you to keep your eye on. So much bigger gap here than we see here. Just going to move that on a little bit further for you. Much more tilt in the pelvis. Then we see with yourself, shoulder tilts. From a turning standpoint, now I've not tried to turn here, but my belt buckle is around more than yours is. The zipper on my jacket, so therefore my sternum, is around every bit, excuse that one, as much as yours is. The left arm has been propelled further and up more than we see with yourself. So if you were to straighten the right leg, flex the left leg more, that would affect the tilt in the pelvis. That would improve your inclination to the ground. That would alter the tilt of your shoulders, which in turn would raise the butt of the club and have the swing looking, as you described it, less flat. Now, in regards to speed, having the left arm travel further during the backswing is a huge contributing factor to how far you can hit the golf ball, should I say. So that's one thing. I'm also going to look a little bit more from face on and just give you a little bit of a feel for things. One of the things that I want you to work on anyway, rotating the pelvis more, allowing the torso to rotate further, is also a huge contributing factor in regards to generating power in the golf swing. So before every shot, I want you to work on this drill. So I want you to do this twice. Adopt your setup, extend, side bend. That side bend comes from the spine and knees and the pelvis. Then take your address again, extend, keeping the arms on the rib cage, and then side bend, really using the knees to create that side bend throughout that movement. Once you've done that a couple of times, go hit a golf ball. But one final thing, I'm just going to get your face on footage back up, and I'm going to ask you to do something when you're hitting these balls and explain why. Okay, so in regards to one last little piece in creating power and a little bit more speed, not that that's your primary focus, but it would be nice to have. I want you to focus on stopping a little bit quicker during your through swing, just as a drill and an exercise. So when we do the extension and side bend drill, fine, we're consciously trying to extend, then side bend, do that a couple of times. When it comes to hit the ball, don't want you to think too much about that. You're going to start to become conditioned to do it anyway. But when you do hit, the thing I want you to try and do is stop quick. So I want you to feel like you're going to stop where both arms are pointing down towards the net. Don't let the arms go past that point. And the reason I want you to do that is it's a great way of feeling how to push up out of the ground with this lower body. So you see how you keep the flex in both knees. That's not a great way of generating force and power during the golf swing. So the more you can push up out the ground, the more potential for power you have. One way of developing that is to start to stop quick. When you stop quick, so when the right arm is parallel with the ground, stopping the swing at that point, in order for you to do that, your lower body has to work differently. So what you're going to do, what you're going to see when we get this next footage across, and this is what I'd like you to do, is do the exercise a couple of times, film it and send it to me on WhatsApp. So the extension, the side bend, just so that I know you're doing it correctly. Once I'm happy with how you're doing it, I want you to practice this for about a week. And then once you've practiced it for about a week, where you extend, side bend, do that twice before every shot. And when you're hitting the ball, hit the ball and stop quick, I want you to send me some footage. And what we'll then do, in fact, we won't do it for a week, we'll do it for about, if we're in lockdown, I don't know whether you're working or not, Warren, so apologies for that. If you have the ability to hit every day, just for 10-15 minutes, let's do sort of 3 or 4 days, and then get me some footage across of you doing the drill. So extend, side bend, then hit a shot stopping quick. So I want to see that sequence from face on and down the line, and then I'll put you a little bit of a comparison together, and we'll just spend 5 minutes talking over the differences, letting you see the difference between the two moves so that you can really crack on and get stuck into this during this lockdown period. Hope that makes sense. If you've got any questions, feel free to just drop me a text via WhatsApp, and I look forward to watching this one progress over the coming weeks.